The year is 1918. The world has been at war for 1,368 days. The continent of Europe is no longer a collection of nations, but a singular, massive scar of trenches stretching from the Swiss border to the North Sea. Millions of men have already vanished into the mud of Verdun, the Somme, and Passchendaele. By the spring of this year, the Allies, Great Britain and France, are not just tired, they are broken. Russia has collapsed into revolution and exited the war, allowing Germany to move 80 divisions, nearly 1 million veteran soldiers, from the Eastern Front to the west. This is the Kaiserschlacht, the Kaiser's battle. It is a gamble for the soul of the world. The German plan is simple. Strike with such overwhelming force that the war ends before the Americans can arrive in force. Among the millions of soldiers, a small, specialized group of Americans is being moved toward the front lines. They aren't the US Army, they are the 4th Marine Brigade. At this moment in history, the Marine Corps is tiny, a colonial police force that usually fights in small skirmishes in the Caribbean or the Pacific. To the veteran German stormtroopers, these Marines are an unknown quantity. To the retreating French, they are a desperate last-ditch hope. But within weeks, a name would emerge from the smoke of a small forest called Belleau Wood, a name that would become the very identity of the Corps: Teufelhunden, devil dogs. For a century, we've been told the Germans gave them this name out of fear. But the truth of how that name was born is a story of blood, marketing, and the most brutal month of combat in American history. At 5 o'clock, on that fateful evening of June 6, 1918, the Marines stepped out of the tree line and into the seemingly innocuous wheat field. What followed was not a battle, but an unspeakable slaughter. The Germans, hidden in their fortified positions within Belleau Wood, unleashed a hailstorm of lead from their Maxim MG-08 machine guns. These weapons, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute, scythed through the American lines like a monstrous, unseen reaper. The wheat, moments before a shimmering sea of gold, rapidly turned crimson, drenched in the blood of American youth. Men were literally cut in half. The forward momentum of the charge was impossible to sustain against such overwhelming, indiscriminate fire. It was here, in the midst of this horrific maelstrom, that the legend of Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly was cemented. A small, wiry man who already possessed 2 medals of honor for separate acts of incredible bravery. Daly stood up amidst the carnage, looked at his pinned-down, terrified men, and bellowed perhaps the most famous challenge in Marine Corps history. "Come on, you sons of bitches. Do you want to live forever?" It was not an order to die, but a furious, defiant roar to embrace the fight, to disregard the impossible odds. Inspired by such raw courage, the remaining Marines abandoned their parade ground formations, dropping to the earth, crawling, rushing in small, desperate waves. The ground itself became a living thing, churning with explosions and the desperate struggle for every inch. The advance was agonizingly slow, measured in yards gained at an unspeakable cost. Each burst of machine gun fire tore new holes in the ranks. Artillery shells rained down, turning sections of the field into geysers of mud and fragmented bodies. The air itself vibrated with the roar of battle, the screams of the wounded, and the constant chilling thump-thump-thump of the German Maxims. It was a baptism of fire, not just for the men, but for the very soul of the United States Marine Corps. By the time the sun began to set, casting long, grotesque shadows across the blood-soaked field, the Marines had suffered more casualties in a single day than in their entire 143-year history. Yet, incredibly, they had reached the edge of the woods. The wheat had been harvested, but the devil dogs were now at the gates of hell itself. Entering Belleau Wood was like stepping into a different dimension. The dense canopy of ancient trees blocked out much of the sunlight, plunging the forest into a perpetual twilight. The ground was a tangled mess of undergrowth, jagged rocks, and massive gnarled roots, making every step a struggle. This was no open field. It was a claustrophobic three-dimensional labyrinth designed for ambush and close-quarters combat. The Germans, masters of defensive warfare, had fortified every natural advantage. Trenches were carved into the earth. Machine gun nests were expertly concealed in hollows and behind boulders, and every potential avenue of advance was covered by intersecting fields of fire. The fighting shifted from the long-range devastation of the wheat field to a brutal, intimate dance of death. This was a war of bayonets, trench knives, and rifle butts. It was a war fought hand-to-hand, often silently, in the thick undergrowth. Marines would crawl within feet of German positions before launching savage, desperate charges. The forest floor became littered with the dead of both sides, often found locked in final, desperate struggles. Communication was nearly impossible amidst the cacophony of sporadic gunfire, grenade blasts, and the screams of men. Companies would lose contact, fighting on isolated fronts, relying solely on the courage and initiative of individual Marines. For nearly 3 weeks, the Battle for Belleau Wood raged. It was not a single engagement, but a series of relentless, grinding assaults. The Germans launched furious counterattacks, desperate to hold their strategic positions and push the Americans back. The Marines, often without food or water, their uniforms in tatters, fought with a ferocity that stunned their adversaries. Their stubborn refusal to yield, their relentless push through what seemed like an impregnable fortress, began to forge a new reputation for American fighting men. They didn't just hold the line, they pushed through it, inch by bloody inch. They cleared the woods with rifle, bayonet, and grenade, in a brutal, sustained effort that broke the German spirit and earned them a fearful respect. The forest became known to the Germans not just as a strong point, but as the Devil's Wood, a place where the Americans fought like wild, unholy beasts. By late June, Belleau Wood had been cleared. The German spearhead toward Paris was snapped. But as the smoke cleared, a new question began to circulate through the ranks and across the Atlantic. Where did the name come from? Every newspaper in America was shouting it, the Devil Dogs. According to the reports, the Germans were so terrified by the Marines' ferocity that they had dubbed them Teufelhunden. It was a perfect story. It was a story of an old world empire being terrified by a new world elite. But when historians began to peel back the layers of the Great War, they found something unsettling. They found that the legend of the Devil Dog might have been the greatest psychological operation in the history of the Marine Corps. If you look at the German archives, the cold, hard records of the Kaiser's army, the word Teufelhunden is nowhere to be found. Not in the diaries of the soldiers who fought there, not in the official reports to Berlin, and not in the maps of the German generals. In fact, if you speak German, you'll notice something immediately. The word is wrong. In German, the plural of devil dog would be Teufelshunde. The term used in the American press was grammatically incorrect, a linguistic fingerprint of someone who didn't speak German, but was trying very hard to sound like they did. So if the Germans didn't name them, who did? To find the answer, we have to look at the man with the eye patch, Floyd Gibbons. Floyd Gibbons was a superstar correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. He was at Belleau Wood, and he had seen the carnage firsthand. He had even been shot in the eye while trying to rescue a fallen officer. Gibbons knew that the public back home was tired of the stalemate. They needed heroes. They needed a name that sounded ancient, terrifying, and invincible. In April 1918, weeks before the Battle of Belleau Wood even began, Gibbons and other journalists started feeding the devil dog narrative to the American public. They claimed the name came from German soldiers who likened the Marines to wild Bavarian mountain dogs. It was a masterstroke of marketing. Why does this matter? Because in war, the story you tell is often as important as the ground you take. The Marine Corps in 1918 was a small branch struggling for its very existence. There were rumors in Washington that the Corps would be absorbed into the Army. They needed a separate identity, a brand that made them legendary. The Devil Dog nickname gave them that. It turned a group of young men from Kansas, New York, and Texas into a mythic force of nature. By the time the Marines were actually bayoneting Germans in the dark roots of Belleau Wood, they weren't just fighting for France. They were fighting to live up to the name that Floyd Gibbons had given them. The lie didn't diminish the bravery, it amplified it. They fought like devils because the world already believed they were. On June 30th, 1918, the French military made it official. General de Gaulle, the same man who had once doubted the Americans, signed a decree. From that day forward, Belleau Wood would be known on all French maps as Bois de la Brigade de Marine. The forest was theirs, but the name Devil Dog would travel much further than France. It traveled back to the United States, where it transformed the very culture of the Marine Corps. In 1922, a registered English bulldog named Jiggs was officially enlisted. He was given a uniform, a rank, and a mission: to be the living face of the Teufelhunden. The bulldog became the symbol of the tenacity, the stubbornness, and the fierce loyalty of the Corps. Today, over a century later, the name is still spoken with reverence. It is etched into the walls of the National Museum of the Marine Corps. It is shouted across the parade decks of Paris Island. When a young recruit is finally called a devil dog for the first time, they are joining a lineage that was forged in the wheat fields of June 1918. They are inheriting a reputation that was born of blood and polished by legend. It doesn't matter if a German soldier never whispered the word Teufelhunden in fear. What matters is that the Marines acted in a way that made the name true. They took a square mile of hell and made it their own. Belleau Wood was the moment the Marine Corps became the elite force we know today. It was the moment they stepped out of the shadow of the army and into their own light. They arrived as green troops. They left as legends. They are the Devil Dogs. Semper Fidelis. On June 30th, 1918, the French military made the sacrifice of the Americans official. General Jean de Gaulle, who had watched the Americans with skepticism only weeks prior, signed a decree that forever changed the map of France. From that day forward, Belleau Wood would be known as Bois de la Brigade de Marine, the wood of the Marine Brigade. It was an honor rarely bestowed upon a foreign unit, a testament to a ferocity that had blunt forced its way into history. But while the name on the map was French, the name in the soul of the Corps was the one Floyd Gibbons had helped manufacture. The Devil Dog had been claimed. It was no longer a headline or a rumor. It was a standard. In 1922, the legendary Brigadier General Smedley Butler took the myth and made it flesh. He officially enlisted a registered English bulldog named Jiggs into the Marine Corps. Jiggs didn't just sit in a kennel. He held rank, wore a custom-made uniform, and was buried with full military honors. He became the living embodiment of the Teufelhunden. Today, that legacy is everywhere. It's in the Bulldog Fountain in the town of Belleau, where Marines still travel to drink the water. It's in the yellow footprints at Paris Island and San Diego, where recruits are told that they are joining a lineage of dogs from hell. The world may argue over who actually coined the phrase, but no one argues over who earned it. The Marines at Belleau Wood took a square mile of jagged rock and ancient trees and turned it into the birthplace of the modern Marine Corps. They arrived as soldiers of a tiny colonial power. They left as the most feared infantry on the planet. They are the devil dogs, Semper Fidelis. To understand why Belleau Wood was so lethal, one must understand the tools these men carried into the dark. The Marines of 1918 were armed with the M1903 Springfield rifle. It was a bolt-action masterpiece of precision, capable of deadly accuracy at distances the Germans found impossible to believe. While the average European soldier was trained to fire in volleys, the Marines were trained as marksmen. At Belleau Wood, German officers reported their men being picked off at 400, 500, even 600 yards. Shots that seemed like magic to a conscript army. But the Springfield, for all its grace, was an old world weapon in a new world war. The Germans countered with the Maxim MG08. It was a water-cooled beast that rarely jammed and never tired. In the dense brush of the woods, the Germans didn't need accuracy. They needed a wall of lead. They created lanes of fire, clearing away branches so that a single machine gun could dominate an entire ravine. And then there was the yellow cloud. On the night of June 14th, the Germans decided that bullets weren't enough. They launched a massive bombardment of mustard gas. Unlike the Green Cross chlorine gas used earlier in the war, mustard gas was a persistent oily liquid. It didn't just choke the lungs, it burned the skin, blinded the eyes, and soaked into the very soil of the woods. For days, Marines had to fight in heavy, suffocating rubber masks, their vision reduced to tiny glass circles, their breath hot and metallic. The woods were no longer just a battlefield. They were a toxic tomb. In this environment, the Marines had to innovate. They began to use trench brooms, shotguns that could clear a German dugout in seconds, and learned the terrifying art of the night raid, where they would slip into German lines with nothing but knives and brass knuckles. It was this shift from traditional soldiers to adaptive savage hunters that truly gave birth to the devil dog persona. They weren't just winning a battle, they were mastering a nightmare. June 26, 1918. 700 hours. A short, clipped message was relayed from the front lines to the headquarters of the 2nd Division. It contained just 5 words that would resonate through the halls of history. Wood's now entirely US Marine Corps. After 26 days of relentless, unmitigated slaughter, the battle was over. The impregnable hunting preserve of the German Empire had been taken by a group of Americans who, only a month prior, were considered green and untested. But the woods the Marines walked out of were not the same woods they had entered. Belleau Wood had been transformed into a skeletal landscape. The ancient oaks and lush canopy had been pulverized into jagged toothpicks by over 1 million rounds of artillery. The ground was no longer earth. It was a mixture of iron, gas-soaked mud, and the remains of 2 empires. To walk through the wood in the days following the victory was to walk through a cathedral of ruin. For the Germans, the shock was systemic. In the weeks following the battle, German intelligence began to piece together just who had hit them. Their internal memos described the Americans as remarkable and having a nerves of steel. One captured German officer famously remarked that the Marines fought with a reckless disregard for life that felt more like a demonic possession than military discipline. This was the true birth of the devil dog spirit. Even if the word Teufelhunden was a creation of the American press, the fear it described was very, very real. The Germans had expected a professional army. They found a pack of hellhounds that refused to stop, even when the world was on fire. The French reaction was one of profound, tearful gratitude. To the people of Paris, the Marines were the saviors of the Marne. On June 30th, the French Sixth Army issued an official order decreeing that Belleau Wood would henceforth and forever be known as Bois de la Brigade de Marine. It remains the only patch of French soil officially renamed to honor an American military unit. But the French went further. They awarded the 5th and 6th Marine Regiments and the 6th Machine Gun Battalion the Croix de Guerre, the Cross of War, not once, not twice, but 3 times. To this day, Marines of these units wear the fourragère on their left shoulder, a green and red braided cord that serves as a permanent, living link to the ghosts of 1918. But what does it mean to be a devil dog in the modern age? It is more than a nickname or a mascot. It is a philosophy of resilience. It is the belief that when the situation is impossible, when the wheat is being harvested by lead, and when the woods are filled with poison, there is a specific breed of human who will stand up and say, "Retreat? Hell, we just got here." It is the spirit of Gunnery Sergeant Dan Daly, of Floyd Gibbons, and of the 1,800 Marines who never left those woods. As you stand today in the Aisne-Marne American Cemetery, which sits at the foot of the woods, you are surrounded by 2,289 white marble crosses and stars of David. The silence there is heavy. It is a silence bought with the noise of June 1918. And if you walk a few hundred yards up into the trees, you will find the Bulldog Fountain. It is a simple stone fountain with the head of a mastiff. It is a tradition for Marines visiting the site to drink from it, to symbolically take in the spirit of those who fought here. They say the water is cold, but the legacy it represents is a fire that never goes out. The story of the Devil Dogs is a story of how a lie became a truth. It began as a clever piece of marketing, a way to make a small branch of the military stand out in a crowded war. But because of the way those men fought, because of the blood they spilled in the wheat and the savagery they showed in the dark, the nickname Devil Dog became a reality. They weren't just called Devil Dogs, they became them. And as long as there is a Marine Corps, as long as there is a first to fight, the echoes of Belleau Wood will continue to bark across the centuries, semper fidelis, always faithful, to the wood, to the name, and to each other.